Ilsa, Namaste, and blessed be everybody. So my name is Dave, and I am doing videos on paganism, Buddhism, all sorts of different faiths, eclectic faiths, if you will. Today's topic, while I'm finally on a good walk, because the weather is finally good, and I can be outside, which is where I want to take all these videos. The topic of today is going to be 4 major questions that you could be using to aid in your path. Now, before I get started in any of these, know that I'm a logic-minded person. I find things to be believable when there's substantial proof to be able to show it. And what we're going to be going over today is going to be logic. We're going to be talking about using logical tools to come to a philosophical conclusion. Now, if that does not float your boat, then this video may not be all that helpful to you. I'm not the type of person, again, to go out and tell somebody else that they're wrong. These are just merely tools that have helped me. Now, you don't have to agree with any one of these. You can disagree wholeheartedly with any of these or all of them. But these are just things that have helped me, and so maybe they'll help you. And so just bear that in mind when I'm going through all of these, okay? So the first one is called the burden of proof. The burden of proof is a means for us to understand how people come to conclusions and not just the conclusion itself. If we sit around and just accept somebody's whatever they're saying for what it is, then we don't know why they feel the way they feel or why they came to the conclusion that they did. And that's something that is very important. We want to try to understand where things come from and not just accept things for them being so. Like a perfect example of this is when we're kids and your mom just says because I said so. That'll actually lead into something else, which is a logical fallacy, but we'll get into that in a minute. But we want to have that ability to understand where somebody's coming from and know why they feel the way they do, because that will help us understand why we would feel the way we would if we were them, or maybe we agree with what they're saying. So the burden of proof is super important for that reason. It helps us understand things. Number 2 is going to be logical fallacies. And this floods in from that last point, because one logical fallacy that many faiths take is the appeal to authority. Whew, some kids are playing. Is the burden of proof is within burden of proof, people tend to use the logical fallacy of appeal to authority. You know, because some deity has said so, or they have said it, that's the only reason. Well, the appeal to authority fallacy makes it so that we don't really know why. You know, as philosophers, I always ask why. You know, why do we believe this? What's the actual use of this? And that can help make our faith stronger, which is exactly why we want to have these questions answered, is those why questions. Another big fallacy that a lot of pagans specifically commit is the ad hoc fallacy. So the ad hoc fallacy is one where we say we see a pair of ravens or crows earlier in the day, and then we head out and we learn some bad news. Okay, well, I'm gonna let this car pass. Well, the ad hoc fallacy would say that with those 2 ravens and you later receive that bad news, if you were to say, oh, those ravens must have been a bad omen, that's an ad hoc fallacy, because that means that you could have regardless gotten that bad news, okay? Or, you know, superstitions essentially is what ad hoc fallacy kind of adds up to, is those superstitions, because there's so many other ways or other reasons that things could be happening that we can't really just take that into account. Now, that doesn't mean that all of these things are wrong or incorrect, because there's ways to justify things, which is actually going to be our next point, which is justified true belief. That's how we can know stuff. Now, I don't really like the true part of it, especially because when we're talking about faith, we're talking about metaphysics. And in metaphysics, we can never know what's actually true or not. So when it comes to justified true belief within metaphysics or our field of the faith, we have to really understand what we know and how we know it. And that's where this JTB, or justified true belief, comes into play. And I just label it as justified belief. So the way that this works is with a thought experiment. So take the example where there is, or you're the son of a farmer. The farmer asks you to go out to the field to see if the sheep is still there. So you go out there and you see a sheep on the hill. Okay, there's a sheep on the top of the hill. Unbeknownst to you, it was not in fact a sheep. Another car coming by. It was not a sheep. It was, or a cow or whatever it was, but it was a pole with a plastic bag on it, okay? But you thought it was a sheep, or whatever your father told you to go looking for. So you come back to your father and you tell him that the sheep's still on the hill. Now, did you know that the sheep was on the hill? Okay. Now that you might have your answer, let me add a twist into this. Now, if you answered no, that he did not know that the sheep was on the hill, now here's another question for you. Unbeknownst to anyone involved, that on the other side of this hill was the sheep, okay, just obstructed from view. You couldn't see the sheep, but you mistook this plastic bag on a pole for being the sheep. Now, did you know that the sheep was there, even though that you couldn't see it and it was just on the other side of the hill, and you mistook a plastic bag for the sheep? It gets tough. It's a good thought experiment. So here's the thing. I like to boil things down. And when I boil things down this way, that's how I've come to a justified belief when it comes to faith. Especially because it's all metaphysics, we can't really know. So the way we are said to have been able to know that, whether we know that we saw the sheep or not, is if we're justified in believing it. If it's true, i.e. the sheep being on the other side of the hill, the sheep was in the field, and is it believable? I mean, normally sheep are in a field, so I mean, it's believable. So according to that, you would still be right. So I know that there's a lot of people that swear by the JTB model, but that's an example of how you still can use all of it. So we can modify it and make it work for what we're using it for. So with the justified belief model that I use, I just want you to look at your beliefs, as I've done with mine, and I still have to remove things, and especially when I'm adding and removing and shifting things around in my own faith. Is it justified? Okay. Now, I don't want to get too in depth with this, but there was a time where I was only believing. I didn't have a justification for it at all. So let this car go by. But having a justified belief, right? So what I'm talking about is that I had a life experience that made me realize that I was using an appeal to authority, where I recognized that I was just believing things for what they were, like what people told me, and I was like, yep, okay, I believe it. But I didn't have any justification for myself, okay? Now, other people can help me justify things, and I can help other people justify things, but these questions are meant internally for you, and I want you to look at it and say, okay, is it a justified belief for myself, okay? Now, these are hard questions that you'll have to ask yourself, and if you take them wholeheartedly as a logical-minded person, they're going to help you a lot. I believe that entirely, because I know they have mine, and that's an inductive reasoning. So that leads into our next and final thing, and that is two strong logical tools. they are types of reasoning. One is deductive reasoning and the other is inductive reasoning. So deductive reasoning is usually like the most basic version of it is there's two premises that follow into a conclusion that is inescapable. So an example of this is A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C. Okay, if we were to just give a small example of this, Jeff is a bachelor. All bachelors are unmarried. Therefore, Jeff is unmarried. Right? So when you have this sort of argument that helps you really look at your beliefs and try to come to a logical conclusion of how things really are, it doesn't matter if your premises, like free will is a premise that people like to argue about a lot. As a matter of fact, there are arguments for like the soul that require free will. And if you believe free will, then the conclusion is inescapable. But that doesn't mean that they're bad or flawed necessarily. I still want you to have that justified belief in those premises. So one form of argumentation is going to be your deductive arguments. Another one that you'll be able to use a lot is inductive arguments. Inductive arguments are where you, man, there are a lot of cars out today, I guess. Inductive arguments are ones where you, essentially it's statistically, okay? So if you're able to say like dog 1 has 4 legs, dog 2 has 4 legs, dog 3 has 4 legs, dog 4 has 4 legs, therefore dog 5 has 4 legs. Now, does this mean that you are entirely correct in that? No, of course not. We've seen dogs that have 3 legs, but generally speaking, dogs have 4 legs. So that's the way inductive argumentation works. I am going to leave you off with one last logical argument that you can use, and that is abductive argumentation. Abductive arguments are ones where you're removing all impossibilities. Okay, so it's kind of like the inverse of an inductive argument. So like, let's say Sally has not been in class for 2 weeks. I have seen Sally on campus the last 2 weeks. Therefore, Sally dropped the course. Right? That's kind of like an abductive argument. Now, I don't want to get into like counter arguments and stuff like that, because I want these questions to be more for you rather than they are to use to argument with somebody. I want you to use these to really hone your own definition of your own faith so you can have stronger belief in it. I know that was always a big problem of mine, is that I didn't believe it logically, and I'm a very logical person. So with all of those out of the way, I'm just to quick recap them. So we want to make sure that we watch for the burden of proof, or know why people believe the way they do. We want to make sure we stay away from logical fallacies and observe whether you have logical fallacies. We want to make sure we have a justified belief. And then lastly, we want to have proper argumentation, or internal argumentation. I don't really preach. I don't want people to argue. I want people to be justified, but I don't necessarily need them to argue. So I hope that those help you out by logically determining beliefs in your own path. I know they were tough for me for a while. I didn't want to agree with it because I had believed it so strongly for a while, but me being a logic-minded person forced me into taking them and learning from them. Now, before I go, I want to mention that I appreciate everybody that's kind of helping me out with these videos and watching them, and it makes me happy that people are watching it. I don't want to be that guy that's doing like the whole like, subscribe, and whatever. So I'm going to say do the YouTubey things it'll make you cozy inside. Okay? So I will see you guys on Wednesday. Have a good one.